Bad vibrations?
This is so campy. Even for the 1970s, this is campy.
Hi there. Something wrong with the elevator?
Everyone I have ever shown this to says it's too campy, but holy hell, I love this so much. And yeah, watching inherently campy stuff is fun, don't get me wrong, but that's not the reason. This works because the film it's in is not campy at all, but Superman is.
Well, they say confession's good for the soul.
No, scratch that.
I'd listen to this man.
Superman chooses to be.
Take him away.
1978 Superman and director Richard Donner understood that the film would only work if Superman brought hope to a cynical world.
They can be a great people, Kal-El. They wish to be. They only lack the light to show the way.
With the close of the 1960s, a new group of filmmakers emerged, affected heavily by the social upheaval of that decade, who wanted to stray away from the more happy-go-lucky entertainment of years past and towards a more dark realism. This meant that the start of the decade was overrun by gritty crime dramas and war films, Patton, The French Connection, and Clockwork Orange, converting the film landscape to be something more adult and jaded. Then the mid-1970s marked a turn towards stories about the common man neglected by the system. Taxi Driver, Rocky, All the President's Men. Needless to say, the decade's media was marked by a heavy sense of cynicism and grit that reflected the attitudes of most young adults at the time. Needless to say, the world was hurting and media reflected it. But the film's an adaptation, not an original work. So Superman was probably not a response to social tensions, just an easy from-the-page adaptations. Nope, it wasn't right off the page. In fact, the comic book Superman was very, very different at the time. The cultural upheaval had caught up to comic Big Blue as he navigated becoming a live news anchor, turning Lois Lane into a black woman for an issue, and having one comic attach the following survey. They had very little idea of how to stay relevant, and their well-meaning attempts were executed very poorly. Okay, so was he like this in the original comics? Well, sometimes. Superman had been around for 40 years before this, and had been everything from a fighter for the common man, to savior of the universe, to a very abusive boyfriend. But Superman at his core was a response to the societal problems of the time. He was an adapted version of the German concept of the Übermensch, written and created by the sons of Jewish immigrants. In his first comics, he didn't fight Lex Luthor or Darkseid, but instead union busters and malicious mine owners during the Great Depression. But over time, pop culture had boiled him down to not much more than a goofy, goody-two-shoes super friend who lived in a cartoon world.
Don't smoke. It doesn't make you grown up. It makes you a loser.
But this adaptation brought him back to his roots. The film had to be what the 70s needed him to be.
Who am I?
To Richard Donner, this is the Superman who would really exist. And even throughout a tumultuous production process, Donner was adamant that the film couldn't feel like a comic book serial.
I have a sign to this day in my office of Superman flying through the air and dragging a sign by him that says verisimilitude. Because the story had to have its own honesty. Everybody had to believe it was real.
On a story level, this meant that audience had to understand the humanity in Superman. To accomplish this, the film basically breaks down into 3 thematic sections. 1, Krypton, a world filled with wonder and reflected material. 2, The Farm, a world filled with open spaces and the promise of a future. And 3, Metropolis, a dirty, bustling hub filled with muggers and criminals. By giving so much time to the first 2 sections of the film, Donner builds up the character to us bit by bit, making us empathize with him, even though we know he can never truly be hurt. The beginning 2 sections establish the contradictive nature of Clark. Firstly, he is the godlike descendant of a society almost obsessed with the concept of justice, and secondly, he is a good-hearted everyman, the blue-collared son of loving parents. This means, on a thematic level, we understand all aspects of Superman even before he puts on the cape. Okay, now that we fully understand this version of Superman on a thematic and contextual level, let's take a look at the actual film. Unlike the overly nice cartoons and comics of the 60s, this Superman distinctly resides in the real world, and at every point, the film takes great pains to remind us. On Krypton, we are shown an inept and self-destructive bureaucracy, much like America at the time. When we get to Earth, Ma and Pa can't deal with infertility.
All these years, as happy as we've been, how I've prayed and prayed the good Lord see fit to give us a child.
And young Clark being relentlessly bullied. Then Pa dies of a heart attack.
Oh, no.
Not a supervillain or a sacrificial tornado, he just passes like most men his age. Donner is constantly reminding us that we are not in control, and to that extent, Superman is not in control. When we get to the city, Clark is thrown into a world where no one cares about him, muggings happen in broad daylight, and apparently a bloodletting rapist cult operates nearby based on what we can glean off of Lois's horribly spelled article. People critique The Man of Steel for being too dark, and it is, but a lot of them forget the real unsanitized world that this first film existed in. But just as this film starts to slide into the bleak, triumphantly, Superman arrives to save Lois. It's amazing. Just the John Williams score, choreographed danger combined to be a perfect entrance.
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me! Who's got you?
And then a now revealed Supes finally goes around helping people. And again, Donner reminds us of the real world. Right here, Superman does the classic cat save.
Bye, Frisky. So long now. Bye.
But how does this scene end?
Mommy! Frisky was stuck in a tree. This man swooped out of the sky and gave him to me.
Haven't I told you to stop telling lies?
The kid gets slapped. Even before that, a cop sees Superman and everyone assumes he's an Irish drunk. And at the climax of the film, Superman isn't fighting a world domination scheme, he's stopping a greedy businessman from destroying homes for economic gain. And once this is established, Superman's brilliance starts to be clear. Superman isn't optimistic about everything, he's hopeful despite everything. And this is where the film comes full circle. Like many films, Superman's production was a mess. Instead of giving Donner an actual budget and schedule, the producers continuously said he was over time and over budget. In an attempt to shoot the film and its sequel back to back, the filming became 19 months of shooting. The budget ballooned to the biggest budget in history for the time, and 11 separate units filmed simultaneously with over 1,000 crew members. Needless to say, it was a truly epic task to manage and creatively oversee.
If Dick hadn't been directing it, 3 people could not have directed that movie. He had such incredible stamina and love for the project.
But by all accounts, Richard never let it show. He would constantly be laughing, goofing, and playing practical jokes on the cast and crew to keep spirits up.
But remember, there's a wire on your neck. Yeah. And don't touch the wires together, you'll be short-circuited and you go up in flames.
After the success of this film, Donner was fired from the partially made sequel and never returned to the franchise. Yet even throughout the harrowing process, Donner never outwardly doubted how amazing this film would be. Much like his main character, he wasn't a man who only sees the good in things, but someone who sees the good in what they could become. And that's what Richard Donner in this film understood. That for Superman to work, he needed to be a beacon of potential and hope for the real world. For Superman to work, we truly needed to believe a man could fly. Well, thank you all for sticking around. Don't forget to like and subscribe to see any of my future videos, and I will see you next week.
No, is it a plane? No, what is it?